Hey there, guys, and welcome to another episode of Interesting Conversations with Mislav Jurić. And today I have a very interesting guest because if he wasn't interesting, then he probably wouldn't be on Interesting Conversations. His name is Alexandr Honchar. So I'm going to let Alexander introduce himself.
Yeah, hello, Mislav. Thank you very much for inviting me to your podcast. Basically, what can I say about myself? I think to summarize briefly what I'm working today on is entrepreneurship. It's being AI practitioner and also being some sort of educator. So basically, I'm a co-founder and the AI chief officer of the consulting company Neurons Lab. I'm also a practitioner. I'm basically coding things myself almost every day for some competitions, for personal research, for my blog. And also I'm involved in some, let's say, some teaching. I've been giving lectures in universities. I'm also writing like blogs, giving workshops, doing some sort of spreading of the also hopefully interesting things on AI.
Awesome.
About me.
Awesome. So I wanted to ask you more questions about your work as a consultant, as an AI consultant. So could you describe for me and for anyone listening to this as well, how does your day-to-day look like as an AI consultant? What it is that you do?
Yeah, I think I'll maybe explain kind of better from the project-oriented point of view. Basically, normally when a potential customer or interested person is coming, normally it's a person who doesn't really know much about AI, data science related stuff. But this is normally a person who's already been educated, so he or she saw some things on the internet, found something related to his or her industry, maybe some particular operating process, and they might have some idea that, okay, my process here is not optimal. So they potentially think that they can fix it. And normally this is the kind of people who are coming to me or to my company with the questions. For example, they see that they spend a lot of time on analyzing some, let's say, some text requests, and they have to basically use more and more people to read them, to analyze them. And if the CEO or the manager knows that there's exists NLP that can automate something, they're like coming and asking me. And first of all, we start with analyzing the business case. So this is the really important point where you need to start to work as a consultant. You are solving the business problem, because there is a typical mistake that I was doing before because I have engineering background. So I like to see everything as the engineering problem, but at some point I need to fix kind of my thinking and say that, okay, there is a business problem because this customer of mine, he actually wants to boost the productivity of the company. He wants to make the better service for his clients. And basically first we define how his product, his service, his processes. And when we define some target, for example, we want to, it's like with the text example, we want to speed up the response to his clients by 20%, for example, from 1 hour to 40 minutes, something like this. And based on this, we try to find the right technology. And we analyze the data that he has. Then, for example, if the client has enough data, if the data has good quality, we can say, okay, this is the technology that can help here. And basically then the programming starts. I can do it myself. It can do my partners or some another guys who from my network, another independent AI engineers. And basically the technology is developed. And what comes next is the deployment, and we are testing how it actually works. With some small application that's called like POC. Maybe we don't fix the whole business process at all. We select just some small part of it. And this is in this small part of the process, we need to show this business boost. So basically, for example, if we want to, again, automatize some analysis of the requests on the website, we select some, which is the most difficult, more heavy, when people spend most of time on it, and we see how it works. And after we see that, okay, we could speed up the process, maybe not by 20% as we expected, but at least by 10%, we say, okay, this is a good start. To improve the technology, we need to improve the process, we need to gather more data. This is how it iteratively rolls. So basically, step by step, we define the business problem, we define what data we need, what technology we can use, we make first small improvements, and based on this, we iteratively iterate. We maybe can even switch to another application. So normally the process is like this. This is like day-by-day routine.
Mm-hmm. And so I think you kind of answered the second question I want to ask you, but
maybe.
just to be clear, So you basically, if I understood the context correctly, you can do this remotely, or do you have to like go on site?
This is the really good question because there are areas, for example, when the business is digital, for example, like e-commerce, and we need to analyze this request from the customers. Of course, when there's digital business, there is no way, no need to go on site and do something. But there are businesses where it's at least doubtful. For example, in the medicine and healthcare, you kind of obviously you can talk to the doctor online, but healthcare and, for example, finance, there are some areas when you better meet and talk to person because this is like a bit, so to say, I don't want to say like old-fashioned, but the areas that are kind of strict, there are a lot of rules. They're also important because your life and the capital of some people depends on this technology. So sometimes you can do it online, sometimes you can't. And there are fields when you have to go on site and check, for example, manufacturing. Basically, when manufacturing utilities, when there is some fabrics or some nuclear plant, thermal plant, when you actually really need to go to the physical building to observe physical machines and to maybe even to set up the sensor on these machines, this is what you can't do online. So it really depends. But for example, if you're a consultant who does just engineering, like you're AI freelancer, for example, of course, maybe you can just do everything online. But if you kind of promote yourself as a person who does business value, it also depends on the business. If the business is purely physical, for example, it's a robotics application, you have to go on site and do it. So it depends. It depends.
Yeah. Thank you for clearing that up. And what I also wanted to ask you, for a consultancy role in AI, is it better to aim for a breadth or a depth? At least in the, like, let's consider the beginning of someone's career. Like someone wants to become an AI consultant, and should that person aim for breadth or should that person aim for depth in the beginning?
You know, I have seen many examples, and also myself, I started as a person who went to the breadth more. I was aiming to learn different technologies, to study different fields. And to me, it worked. But to be honest, at the moment, like what I see, like looking behind and my career and seeing what other people do, I think it's maybe better to do it a bit differently. I think it's really cool to start with focus on something, to spend some years to get focused on some technology or on some business domain, and only after to go in breadth. I see that in our field in AI and data science, it's really what is really valuable is the deep knowledge of something, because even, for example, you can be like a general guy who knows NLP, for example, you know the technology, but when you go to the different business domains, you really need to understand the business, and you have two choices. Or you need to be like really super deep expert in NLP, so you can easily solve any technical problem there, or you can be an expert, for example, in e-commerce, so you know basically all the business problem of the internet shops they deal with. And this way you can be not the best NLP engineer, but you know exactly where to apply it. So I see that maybe this is, now I think it's a better start when you start as a focus on some technology or some business domain. But then I think it's good to build, that's what they call now in internet, like T-shaped expert or something like this. Like you had the focus on one thing, and then on the side you learn something about, for example, about marketing, about sales, or some like maybe even some scientific fields. So this way, I think this T-shaped thing is really, really good.
Yeah, thank you for clearing that up and for the advice. And now I also like wanted to ask you some other questions. I think this one applies to me because I used to work. I used to work in an AI team, but I wasn't working on models. I was working on like the infrastructure stuff. So, what advice would you have for someone transitioning from regular software engineering into an AI, machine learning, or data science related job? How would that person do this most effectively?
I think it also depends on the goals of this person, because, for example, what I see now in the field, that many people who started as the pure data scientists, it actually led to a really big problem, because let's say classical data scientist, there is a joke. It's a person who programs worse than a software engineer and who knows mathematics worse than a mathematician. So it's like a person who does two things but not really well. So the software engineer has a big advantage because he or she has a background of good practice in software engineering. So this way you can position yourself that do some things like DevOps, you can do things like infrastructure. And honestly, I think that, for example, if you really see and feel that like you want to do modeling, you want to dive into the algorithms, you want to do something like related to the research, scientific things, maybe for you, software engineering background will be like a bonus, but you still will need to learn like how to implement algorithms from scratch, to study with mathematics, statistics, etc., because the value of the researcher, the guy who creates the models, is, and then you can give it to the software engineer who can re-implement it in C++ or something like this. So I think that if you're like a software engineer who want to move to data science, etc., basically you have like two paths. First one, you can rely on your strong points, and you can basically be kind of like operationalizes the solutions. This way, maybe you will not do very much of modeling, but you'll be very valuable, because in data science today, there are not many people who understand like basics of the modeling and are good software engineers. So you can definitely fit in the team. But if you want to do like a modeling, if you're excited by the mathematics, I think, okay, like software engineer is a good background, is a good bonus, but still people will look for your mathematical skills, So it's like you're still on the crossroads here. You need to choose what you want to focus on.
Yeah, got it. So basically, just to recap, for people that are trying to transition into more data science role, they should focus on math and statistics and modeling. And if people want to be like some like machine learning engineers or data engineers, they actually have a huge advantage.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Awesome. So the second question actually relates to this, and it's, among machine learning engineer, data scientist, and data engineer positions, which one of those is the easiest one in terms of later transitioning, or is it effectively the same? Are all transitions possible? So we just discussed that, you have to focus on different things, but now let's say that like you're a software engineer and there was a data engineering position and you come in data engineering position. And let's say, that you work as a data engineer and you see, okay, this looks cool, but I'd like to try out, a data scientist role. How hard do you think it is to go that route? So from, let's say, data engineer to data scientist versus the reverse. And also there's like this machine learning engineer, which I Googled about. I'm not really sure about this. I think machine learning engineer is kind of a bit of both, like both data scientist and the data engineer, some stuff like that. So if you had some perspectives on that, like which role is kind of the easiest to transition to the other two?
Oh, it's an interesting question, because I would say that if you have a software engineering background, it's always easier to you to learn another software engineering tool. And basically, when you apply for a data engineering position, they will ask you more about software engineering. And if you have this background, this experience, is always easier, because being a data scientist will require from you like knowledge of some statistics and mathematics. Being a machine learning engineer, again, how I see this position is more classically called as the algorithm developer. It's a person who basically implements scientific papers from scratch, like takes the paper from some conference about some neural network and implements it. So I think it's easier for a software engineer to learn another big data tool, for example, than for a person who is software engineer and uses big data tools to learn again something like mathematics, algorithms, and statistics. But again, I think it depends on the case, because there are different people, and you never know. Because I've met people that studied, for example, mathematics, but they had to work as software engineers, but they still get a mathematical background. And for them, if they are on the crossroads, they can easily repeat like calculus, statistics, and go to the data science. For them, it's not a problem. For someone, it's a bit different. So I think that, like how you stated the question, it's easier to go from data engineer to data engineer, but it depends.
And do you think, like, just to kind of add on to this question, do you think that someone who doesn't have that much of a math background, and by here I mean, I don't really mean people who, for example, graduated with a computer science degree, because I think they probably have enough like math background, but if someone is like a software engineer and doesn't really have a strong math background versus somebody who like does have a math background and works as a data scientist and wants to become a data engineer, do you think that it's easier to catch up on software engineering or catch up on math, on theoretical math later on in life, let's say?
It's also another good question. I think that honestly, I don't know, because I want to say that classical mathematics is a bit harder, but I think it also depends on the person. Big fan, because for example, now we see the crisis, and a lot of people who are weak professionals, basically they're losing their jobs, and this is basically normal. In the when there's the crisis, the sound is the weakest, who kind of just jumped in the profession, who doesn't know basics that much, they get fired first. And this crisis, they happen all the time. And that's why I'm a fan of kind of fundamental approach. And really, when you choose the profession, I think it's important to know the fundamentals, because there are a lot of people who kind of just study by the tutorials on Medium, and they can get lucky, they can pass the interview because there is a demand. But when there is the crisis, company needs people who know the fundamentals, because they can rely on them. This is much more strong background. And that's why I think that when you kind of think in what to catch up later, you also need to think like a bit strategically, like what is your personal goal, what is your future profession. I mean, I understand that today it's we're changing professions all the time, which is normal, but choose the long-term goals, you also choose the corresponding fundamentals. And that's why you need to think like who you are in 10 years from now. If you see yourself more like a researcher, experimentator, then you need to catch up with the mathematics. And if you see yourself as a person who like builds the solutions, scales them, you need to catch up with the programming. So I think it's like you need to think kind of long term.
Yeah, got it. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, I also think, I mean, just my opinion, I as someone who's about to major in computer science, hopefully, right? if I don't screw something up, I think I should. I think like math is pretty difficult to like catch up on later. I would say that it's more difficult to catch up on math than it is on software engineering. But again, software engineering is also difficult, and by software engineering I mean like stuff like algorithms, like, you know, not like, you know, how do I do this particular thing in this particular language, but like, you know, implementing BFS, DFS, like some fundamental algorithms, like that stuff is also pretty difficult to wrap your head around when you're transitioning into it. So yeah, I think like this question is pretty, I think we agree that this question is pretty difficult. Uh, yeah, but okay, so another question I had for you is, what resources have you used to get on top of the field of AI when you were like learning it and you really kind of grew? What resources did you use?
When I just first started to kind of learn something about the machine learning, it was when I was on my second year of my bachelor's back in Ukraine. And basically, I was just Google. My first motivation was because I was studying applied mathematics and I didn't understand what applied mathematicians do. So basically, first I was just Googling like applications of applied mathematics. And that's how I found first computer vision. That's how I found machine learning. So basically, first I was really doing kind of like ad hoc learning, just kind of like, you know, Googling things and checking them out. It was pretty random. Then I found the famous Andrew in Stanford course on the Coursera, which is like every one of us was taking. And after that, education was like by periods, ad hoc, and then it was something like more like standardized. Then again, ad hoc, and then again standardized. So started with random search, then I took this Android course. Then again, I was checking some random things, blogs, YouTubes, tutorials, and after that, I started to read a bit more books. Basically, I read to kind of try yourself, then get systematic education. Then again, you trying yourself, then you get systematic education again. So after this random looks, I started to read books. I read Christopher Bishop, pattern recognition machine learning book, which is kind of difficult, but it really gives good systematic view on machine learning. Then again, I started to looking for tutorials, checking stuff. Then I remember I read a book of Jan Goodfellow, deep learning book, and it also gave me a bit more better fundamental understanding of the deep learning. And also meanwhile, I was getting education, doing my master's in Verona. So I would say that I was always kind of mixing a bit fundamental, and fundamental for me was classical education in universities and taking some courses and reading books. But between them, I was always checking some tutorials of my interest. So something like this.
Yeah, that sounds actually pretty good approach. And it obviously worked out for you, so congratulations.
Yeah, and even today I'm doing the same. For example, right now I have a couple of books to read, like the book Richard Sutton on reinforcement learning. And this is what I want to get, because I tried some tutorials on reinforcement learning on the internet. Okay, I kind of know how to code some stuff, but now I want to get fundamental understanding. So I got the book, I read it, and after it, I'll dive again into tutorials, but with much more deeper understanding of what I'm doing. Every field I learn, I follow in kind of this approach.
Yeah, I think it kind of makes sense, and that's what I've been thinking in terms of my education, because my big kind of question was, okay, when I graduate with the master's degree in computer science, do I go get a PhD right off the gate, or do I work in the industry first? And I kind of thought about this question a lot, and to me the answer was, okay, I think I'll try to work in the industry first, just to see where the limits of my knowledge are, right? And then kind of when I feel the limit, or when I see, okay, this field isn't yet on the level where it should be, right? There's this unexplored research question. That's exactly the research question that I could potentially do for my PhD. So it's kind of I would say on a more broad scope, the thing you were talking about, but just more in more academical setting, I'd say.
I totally agree with you. I'm also following kind of the same approach. For example, I did my master's, and now I'm on my break, but I'm already I already even know the fields when I want to do the research. So already kind of even talking to some professors, because I know that maybe in 1 year or two, maybe even less, I will be ready to kind of dive deeper into some area. But I took a year of break because I wanted to kind of concentrate on business and work a bit more, explore the things, and now I already have the vision for the focus again. So I think I like this approach.
Yeah, it's good to have two people that like the same approach on the same podcast.
Yeah.
I think we could, after the podcast, we could calculate the probability of two people on the planet Earth being on the same podcast and liking the same approach. Yeah. So a related question to this I have is, what resources do you use to keep abreast of the new developments in the field of machine learning AI?
Basically, I was even writing a post about it, so we can add the link. We better kind of give the list of the things.
Yeah,
but mainly what I check kind of three main directions. First one, I read the general technology blogs, starting from the TechCrunch, MIT Technology Review, Harvard Business Review, this kind of things. There I kind of high level things. Then I check kind of totally other side. I check what happens in the research, and for the research, I mainly follow from the Twitter and from some couple of Facebook groups. Basically, on Twitter, I follow all the researchers from the industry, from the universities I like, and also what about Twitter community and this is kind of the third part. A part of checking the business use, a part of checking the papers and the conferences that people talk about. In Twitter and the discussions, people really kind of send the interesting things that you can easily skip if you follow only big trends, because they're really interesting, PhD students, they're interesting researchers that not very known, they're just practitioners that post interesting blogs that you might easily miss. But when you know that some like researcher from, for example, Facebook or Stanford, he liked some tweet of some guy you didn't know about, but then you check it and you know, wow, this is like a cool practitioner who posts cool stuff about like creative AI. And then you follow this guy again, and in your feed, you see much more interesting things. So I kind of follow like business, research, and I call it like conversations. And this is like mainly what I read.
Yeah. I also like registered on Twitter, and I was surprised by. I think I mean, since I'm this is sort of like my personal brand, so to speak, and I've been on like a lot of social media, but Twitter is probably the most business like slash ideas like social network. It's like people are writing very clear stuff. I mean, at least some of them, right? There's people
Yeah.
that aren't are like just their tweets are all over the place. But yeah, I follow some people from DeepMind, OpenAI as well, and yeah, it's like really great. They like post like a short paragraph, and then they post the link to the paper, and you can really see like everything that's going on. Yeah, that's really awesome. And so I'm really curious about this next question, right? Because I think it interests me as well as probably a lot of other people. You said that so you essentially do AI consulting. You also mentioned that you're a co-founder at a startup. And I want to ask like a broad question, which is startups versus consulting. What is more likely to generate wealth in terms of risk to reward ratio? The assumption here is that they are mutually exclusive, while that may not be the case. So essentially what I'm asking is, let's say that someone wants to generate a lot of wealth. And by wealth, I mean money. And that person can either, and let's assume for this case that they are mutually exclusive, while in reality they may not be. And you can also maybe elaborate on that in your answer. And let's say that person is kind of wondering, okay, should I go for a startup? Whatever it is, like, maybe that person already has an idea, maybe they don't have, but they're kind of trying to figure out. Or can they do consulting? Now, the way I see it, and I'm really curious in your answer, but I just want to maybe kind of frame the question better. So first, the way I see it is I think that by doing consulting, you're still foundationally, you're much better off if you're if you have your own company and you do consulting than if you are an employee. So you're just charging more money and you're probably earning way more money than if you were an employee, because you also have a lot more risk. However, you don't have like a product, and also you probably don't have some equity. I mean, the consulting company has equity, but the equity is related to you doing the service and you putting in your hours to get like paid for it, right? So I was wondering, like, what's your opinion? I know I threw out a lot of things, but I just want to like really neatly frame the question.
Yeah, of course. Basically, if to answer briefly to a question, of course, over the long term, creating products at scale is a better way to generate wealth. And I think it's clear and it's kind of relative. It's better to sell a scalable product than to sell your time or even like time of other people. That's completely makes sense. Kind of to answer simply, yes. The problem is that, for example, I worked for the startups, and I even kind of try to promote the ideas of myself. And I really understand that making product startups, it's much more difficult than it looks like. And the probability to succeed are much more less. And what I also see, like the pattern of the founders of the as you say, product startups, are there the people who are really great in understanding needs of people and doing the right things at the right time. And for example, that's why myself, I'm not yet this kind of person. My main career was mainly like engineering, the researcher. So, I was mainly like programming algorithms and like blogging about it, okay? But I was never really like too much on the product side. Only like last year of my like being independent freelancer, I was kind of trying to dig more into the businesses. And okay, for example, now as the co-founder of the consulting company, also basically that's my work to dive into the businesses. And that's why I see like what I'm doing right now, like building a consulting company, is a great way to understand better businesses. So for every project, a part of doing something for my client, I also learn a lot from my client. And for example, I already even see what, for example, me and my partners, we already see some products we can build, because over the last year we saw so many different projects, we worked with many different customers, and we saw the patterns, and these patterns I couldn't see as basically as the freelance machine learning engineer, because what I was doing implementing convolutional neural networks or deploying some stuff, and I couldn't really see the business values. But now, for example, I see better the business values. So for example, I'm much more confident launch a product in a year or two from now, because now I already have this experience. And that's why I think that most probably like consulting product are kind of exclusive, but product can grow from consulting. And basically that's how I see my path. To me, doing consulting is some way to get closer to the business understanding, to the product understanding, to build, because while building products for others, I learn how to build the products myself. See it. And also what about like the consulting firm, that it's not necessary that you sell your time. For example, when you build a company, also you can you'll get another partner, so there's other people on board. Basically consulting companies, when you kind of take a bit of business model from say outsourcing and you kind of mix it a bit, there's also valuation, because there is a network of people, there is your reputation, there is the code base, knowledge base, product base, and this can be evaluated. Of course, it's not evaluated like hundreds of millions like product startups, but normally consulting companies, they have the valuation itself, and your equity, it also can cost something if you capitalize basically the knowledge. If you don't just sell the programming time of other people, but if you capitalize the knowledge, your consulting company can also, the equities of this company can also value relatively a lot, but maybe obviously less than some product company.
Yeah, and by what you said is like not only selling programming time, but kind of productizing your knowledge. Do you mean, for example, selling info products or something like that? What do you exactly mean by that?
No, I mean that, for example, that you worked with 3 customers that are more or less the same, and you found the pattern. So basically what you can do now, you can build, for example, as the simplest case, some SaaS solution, and start to sell it first to these 3 clients, for example, and they all use the same, and then you scale it. And basically you created your product startup this way, based on these 3 clients' needs. Yeah, this is what I mean.
Yeah, that actually sounds awesome. I think that like a good progression would then be like, to go from a consultant where you kind of learn exactly as you said, like you learn the needs of the actual businesses. And then once you feel confident, you're like, okay, I saw like 5 different businesses and they all have the same issue. Maybe I could create a software as a service startup that solves that issue. And then it can, for example, also be another company, right? Why wouldn't it? Yeah. That sounds awesome. Yeah. And so I actually have another question related to sort of entrepreneurial ventures. And that is, to succeed at an entrepreneurial venture, do you need to love it, or can you be motivated purely by financial incentives? What's your opinion on that?
I kind of believe in like the pyramid of the human values. So I think at some point you obviously get motivated, because if you don't, for example, if you don't have at least some level of the financial stability, and for example, I mean, for different people they need different levels. Some person can be happy only with 3 houses, 3 cars, and eat every day in expensive restaurants. For example, for someone this kind of threshold is a bit lower. But I think obviously first you get motivated with some sort of like basic financial needs. But I think at least in our profession, you can satisfy most of these needs even when you're employed, because you're lucky to be in the relatively high paid profession. So to me, the motivation wasn't purely financial. I mean, I was understanding that obviously I can earn like more than the employee and more than the freelancer, but I was already, and I'm already on some level that, okay, I don't have some like I want a nicer house, I want a car, etc. But to me, it's like, okay, I know how to do it. It doesn't really, oh my God, I have to have it urgently. I'm more motivated by the idea that doing a business, it's actually kind of, to me, it's more a path of self-development. Because to me, it's like a way when you do more things, you do more impact, you are more useful to people, and you really change the world. Because I mean, obviously, as the professional, you also change the world. But let's be honest, as a professional, your part is much smaller. And now, when I'm kind of being the entrepreneur, the person who creates the companies, okay, company, not companies yet, but I really see that the person who creates the company and influences lives of other people is much more hard, and it opens your eyes to many things. So I am more motivated by entrepreneurship as a way to grow myself, to do more impact, to become a better person, to serve to other people more. And this is basically this kind of understanding of this what motivates, like kind of like personal growth and being more useful and doing more things, because I can kind of scale the work of other professionals and do more impact. That's what for me is like important here.
Yeah, that sounds like actually a solid combination of like both the financial factors, but for you it's probably higher, like you want to have an impact. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for answering that. And so I wanted to ask you, in your experience of being a consultant in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and as being a company co-founder, what other technical and non-technical skills would you need for each of those, alongside great expertise in AI machine learning? And to just elaborate a bit more, I think you mentioned it at the beginning, maybe not explicitly, but at the beginning of the podcast, you said that foundationally you're solving business issues. And I was reading this article, which was because I was a little bit confused about, okay, what's the difference between a freelancer and a consultant? And I think, again, you really touched upon this in the beginning of the podcast, is that, okay, consultant solves business problems while a freelancer like just kind of codes. They both do coding, but the framing of the problem is different when it comes to a consultant than it is to a freelancer. So this kind of ties into the part of the question. So essentially, what are the technical and the non-technical skills that you need in order to be a consultant or a startup founder, alongside like being a huge expert in your domain?
Okay, I see. I think, again, this is just, I don't know if this is a correct answer. I think I also think that people come to the consultant and entrepreneurship in many different ways. And I think if you ask other people, they'll most probably give you another answers. What fundamental to being a consultant, to be the entrepreneur, is like having some sort of like emotional intelligence and ability to listen to people and to understand them. This is something like, because as you said, right, as the freelance engineer, basically you're getting the exact technical task and you're valued by the technical quality. Basically your code is good, it runs well, it handles exception, etc. So we all know about it. But as the consultant, as the entrepreneur, when you deal with the client, the code is like, it's just a tool to do something bigger, to make some change in the life of person. When you kind of aim to change the life of the person, even in the business context, even in a small business context, you really need to listen well, need to understand what drives this person, because different clients want different things. For example, for someone, AI is like a motivation. For example, this person wants AI in the startup because he wants to get higher valuation of his startup. And it's completely fine, but you need to understand that this is the goal and you want to make something cool, something hyped, and you kind of talk about the person, about the valuation. Someone, for example, wants more free time because he or she has a lot of routines. And for example, and this way you kind of focus more on how you can save time on the person. You focus on AI, not to be cool, but actually time saving. And for someone, for example, it's a lot of like running costs. For example, like in the manufacturing, predictive maintenance, when the machines are breaking all the time, it's a mess, and it's like a lot of losses, also a lot of nerves, like in the night something is broken, and for example, if you're the head of engineering in the factory, it's your fault. So this way you kind of focus on saving the nerves and having smart notifications, etc. And the person can say later, thanks to you, finally I can sleep in the nights because I know that everything is safe. And this is like the difference. And I think this is like maybe fundamental. Understanding people. And when you really understand people, when you listen to them, just about the listening, this way you can easier do marketing because you know what you tell to the world. You can easier do sales, you can easier do management, because even when you have to manage, for example, like developers, when you can explain them what the person really wants, also developers get the idea that developing something, not just the code, they're developing something that's useful. So I think to me this is like the fundamental skill, listening and understanding the people, and it grows everything from this.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful answer. And basically, my final question is, it isn't a question. It's just like an open-ended question, which is like, do you have any parting thoughts for anybody that's listening to this podcast? Like, would you like to say something that maybe I missed out on in my questions, or that you feel you'd wanted to share with anyone listening?
I don't know, I'm never good in something like saying supervised things. It's kind of, I'm okay with answering the question, but when you ask me something like this, I feel like it's like super, I have to say something important, you know? I mean, if to summarize what I was saying here, I think maybe the two most important things, what I personally find important, for example, for me, and that's what I kind of try to spread to the world, so to say, is concentrating more on the fundamentals, because the trends, the hype, the technologies, they change all the time. Today we have AI, after tomorrow we have quantum computing, in 20 years we'll have some programming on the brain level, in 50 years we'll have something else. But let's be honest, fundamentals of the things, they will always stay the same. And we still, in the core, there will be some mathematics, engineering, computer science, and the fundamental sciences. And I think for us, people who, I mean, I think for this, on this podcast, you'll be mainly like engineering guys and girls, most probably. So I think for us, it's important not to kind of focus on the fundamentals, because if you got the fundamentals right, you can learn any framework, you can learn any technology, because it all grows from this. And this is like one part. And second part, I think it's when you know the fundamentals of your profession, your technology, you can also learn fundamentals of the humans, of people around you. And when you really kind of know fundamentals of your profession, and you know what people want, you can literally change the world, because you change the lives of people with your profession. And I think thinking about what you're doing kind of in this framework is, it even makes your life better, because you are more conscious, because you think not just today I'm going to learn TensorFlow 2.0 because of some cool feature to code something. You know that you're really changing something. Even you're doing the same code in TensorFlow. And this is just the change of the mindset. And I think this is what I might tell.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is an awesome way to end the podcast episode. So to everyone who's listening, thank you for listening. And I will talk to you in the next episode. Talk soon.